You can imagine that previously the nature of leadership as well was quite different, for at that time there existed nothing like a mutual understanding among men resting on an appeal to reason. In those days of dim clairvoyance, mutual understanding was based upon a subconscious influence passing from one to the other. Especially was there still present to a high degree something we know today only in its last misinterpreted and misunderstood surviving form, namely a kind of suggestion, a subconscious influence from man to man, appealing but little to the active cooperation of the other soul. Looking back to early Atlantean times, we see that a powerful effect was exercised on the other soul the moment any image, any sensation arose in a man's soul, and he directed his will upon the other person. All influences were powerful, as was also the will to receive them. Only traces of all this still exist today. Picture to yourself a man of that time passing another while executing certain gestures. If the observer were even slightly the weaker of the two, he would have felt impelled to imitate and mimic all the gestures. The only surviving remnant of this sort of thing is our inclination to yawn when we see another person yawning. Formerly, a far closer tie prevailed between human beings, based on the fact that they lived in an atmosphere totally different from that of today. Only during a heavy rain do we nowadays live in water-soaked air. In that time, however, the air was constantly saturated with dense moisture. By means of the spiritual and clairvoyant nature of their consciousness, all men of that time could perceive whatever spiritual influences were exerted on them. Nowadays, one who knows nothing of spiritual science laughs when you tell him his astral body shows the effects of luciferic spirits. But then, he does not know that the influence of these spirits is far stronger than it would be if he took note of them. In Atlantis, the leaders and their disciples kept a careful watch over everything that excited passions, instincts, and desires from that direction, which aroused in man a deeper interest in his physical, sensible surroundings than was beneficial for his progressive development in the world. One who aspired to become a leader had first of all to practice this self-knowledge and watch himself carefully for anything that might arise through Lucifer's influence. He had to observe these luciferic spiritual beings in his own astral body most accurately, for by so doing he could keep them at a distance. This also enabled him to perceive the other divine spiritual beings, and the regions beheld by men corresponded to the one from which they had descended. There were human souls, for instance, that had come down from Mars, and when these, in keeping with their development, combated the luciferic influences in their own astral body, they attained to a higher degree of clairvoyance, to a pure and good seership, and they beheld the higher spiritual beings of the region from which they themselves had descended, from the Mars region. In ancient Atlantis, there were institutions, schools, where those who had descended, for example, from Mars were accepted, when sufficiently mature, for the purpose of studying the mysteries of Mars. There were other sanctuaries where those who had come from Venus became acquainted with Venus mysteries. Applying the later term oracle to these institutions, we have in Atlantis a Mars oracle, where the mysteries of Mars were studied, a Saturn oracle, a Jupiter oracle, a Venus oracle, and so on. The most exalted was the Sun oracle, and the loftiest of all the initiates was the ranking initiate of the Sun oracle. Because suggestions and the influences of will played so important a part, the whole method of instruction was very different. Let us try to imagine how teacher and pupil conversed with each other.